Hello, this is Fritz-Ay says, and welcome back to One Last Night. So, I know I've been keeping them a little bit short in the past, but I'm finally feeling 100% better. And yeah, I'm excited to get through the last bit of this build. I think we just left off with Dorian going to sleep in a storage unit after he got locked up by the bandits after meeting his ex and a mysterious palace cat. Don't know what's going on with Xavier and his state of mind, so let's get started. I often found parks to be a place of comfort for me. There was something relaxing about walking the trails, seeing a myriad of strangers that had gathered there. Walking down trails, sitting on benches, flying kites, it was a place where you could go to enjoy some good time outdoors despite the busyness of the city. In particular, there was one specific park by the lakefront that had always been my favorite. The water was close enough to the center green that you could dip your toes in it on a hot summer day, watching the clouds drift gently by in the wind. A few islands sat off in the distance, a painted ferry making trips back and forth across the water, carrying the passengers who wanted to visit. It was cloudy that day, but still warm from the summer heat. The breeze sweeping in from the lakefront helped to cool me down as I sat on the park bench. I'd wanted to be watching the world around me, spending time enjoying myself like so many others were. Instead, I was staring blurrily at the ground, tears clouding my eyes as I struggled to hold back the tide of emotion that still lingered inside of me. It had been 3 months since Alistar and I had broken up, and the pain still ate away at my insides every waking moment. I thought we could have spent the rest of our lives together. That clearly hadn't been in the cards, though, and I was left reeling from the abruptness for a long while. I'd hoped the park could cheer me up. It didn't work. I was reminded of the memories we'd made there instead. They were small ones, yes, but the memories were everywhere. Anything and everything, from us jogging along the lakeside to him buying me a bouquet of flowers one evening. I thought he loved me. The tears I'd been shedding so often began to well up again, threatening to overflow. I remember how desperately I wanted to be rid of those feelings. I blinked rapidly, straining to keep the tears from spilling. I didn't want to be one of those people that cries in public. I couldn't handle that much of attention right now. No matter how hard I tried, though, once the emotions started, there was no way of stopping them. They just built up till the dam inevitably burst. I started sobbing, shoving my face into my hands to muffle the noise somewhat, but it didn't help all that much. The sound was reduced from a piercing cry of anguish to a muffled sob of regret. I missed the lion that I was in love with, the man who had shown me so much love and affection and kindness. He was a piece of myself I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I couldn't talk to him then, too afraid my emotions would take over again, and I'd do or say something regrettable. If I wanted another chance, I had to wait. As I was sitting there, lost in my thoughts and desperation, I hadn't realized I'd stopped paying attention to my surroundings. I hadn't noticed the people that had stared as they walked by, nor the sun that had slowly begun to peek out from behind the clouds. I especially hadn't noticed the man standing next to me, clearing his throat as he prepared himself to speak.
Excuse me.
I'd stopped, slowly bringing my face out of my hands.
I thought you might need this.
I turned bashfully to look at the stranger, feeling the heat growing on my cheeks. Illuminated by the warm lighting of the sun stood a tall, large wolf. His fur was a shade of silver, so light it almost looked blue, blowing gently in the breeze. A soft smile filled his muzzle, awkward at my delicate and embarrassing situation, but still presenting a caring nature. He was wearing a navy blue button-up, the topmost button undone. His outheld hand was clutching a white handkerchief that must have been in his breast pocket. What I'd focused on most were his eyes. They were full of concern, to be sure, but the coloring was unlike any I'd ever seen. Shades of blue, green, and purple danced across his irises, mesmerizing me in their beauty. I'd seen a similar coloration once when my parents had taken me on a trip up north as a child. It really reminded me of Aurora Borealis.
I'm sorry?
I blinked before my face flushed further in embarrassment. Sorry, it's just your eyes reminded me of the Northern Lights. He smiled at that, taking my response as an invitation to sit next to me.
No apologies necessary. I thought that might have been what you were talking about.
Then why do you sound so confused? He blushed at my teasing, growing embarrassed. The reaction had drawn a small smile out of me in response. I bumped my shoulder into his, drawing his attention again. I was only kidding around. That same smile from earlier spread across his face in response to seeing mine.
Glad to see you feeling good enough to smile. A much better look than crying into your hands.
My cheeks reddened once more, my hands moving instinctually to wipe my face again.
Here, allow me.
He raised the handkerchief again, slowly wiping the soft fabric under my eyes to dry the fallen tears before holding it out for me to take.
I'm sure you can blow your nose just fine.
There was no malice or judgment in the statement, no hints of teasing. He was just aware of my feelings and knew I'd feel too awkward to have him hold it for me. In just the first minute of us meeting, this wolf had shown me a kindness and thoughtfulness I hadn't felt in months, completely unprompted. I didn't know people like him really existed. Gently, I'd taken the cloth and blowed, only realizing I didn't know what the etiquette was after having dirtied someone else's handkerchief. I decided on holding it, lowering my hands into my lap and staring at the crumpled thing.
If you don't mind me asking, why are you so upset?
I remained silent, unsure whether to say anything. He'd taken notice that I hadn't outright refused and pushed forward.
I know I'm a stranger, but sometimes telling your problems to someone you don't know can help lift some of whatever burden you're bearing, even just a bit. If you need it, I'm here to help.
It was those final 4 words that got me, echoing repeatedly in my mind. I had heard it plenty of times from my friends, and I'd known they'd all meant it. But right here, right now, hearing them from someone I'd never met, it chipped a small piece off of that sadness that had been consuming me, threatening to pull me down into it. If there were people like him in the world, then maybe things wouldn't suck for whatever was to come next, at least for a little while. So I told him. It all came pouring out of me like a flood. Everything from meeting Alistair, to him asking me out, our almost 2 years together, until what had happened 3 months ago and our relationship had hit its end. All of that time, all of that trust built, everything, thrown out the window in a single fucking evening. I'm hurt. I'm scared. I don't know what to do with myself anymore. I wasn't sure when I'd started crying. My tears had soaked the wolf's handkerchief. The worst part of it all, the thing that my heart keeps coming back to, is that I was so sure he loved me. Where did things go so wrong? Am I even worth loving? The stranger had been silent the whole time, giving me his full attention as I'd ranted. I wasn't sure whether I'd gone too far in my ramblings. It was a heavy thing to unload on a person, even a friend, let alone someone I just met minutes before. I'd waited for him to speak, to tell me he was sorry that he'd said anything, and that I was too much. I waited to hear him regret ever speaking to me, to see him get up and leave. If someone so close to me had cast me aside, what reason was there for this man to stay? Not in a moment after that thought, he surprised me. I felt the warmth of his body wrap itself around mine, bringing me in for a hug. His body was strong but soft, his fur silky smooth and smelling of citrus. It was comforting in a deep, intimate way, even before he spoke.
You'll be okay. Don't place your values so much on others and rely more on yourself. You are enough, just as you are.
There was a moment's pause before the silent tears turned into sobs. I clutched his shirt as I let everything I'd been building up out. All the sadness, all the pain, all the foolish, petty games we'd played. It was messy and uncomfortable, but he didn't care. He just rubbed my back comfortably, making sure I was okay. It took an uncomfortably long time, but I eventually managed to compose myself. I released myself from the hug and took a deep breath, wiping my face once more with the handkerchief. Thank you for that. Really. That gentle smile from earlier returned.
Don't mention it. Kindness can go a long way, and it's better to spread it than to hoard it to yourself.
I'd give him a smile to match his, and he stood up, preparing to take his leave.
Oh, before I forget, take one of these.
He handed me a small rectangular business card.
If you ever need anything, even if it's just to hang out and take your mind off of life, text me.
I nodded, smiling up at the wolf. Will do. I squinted at the card, reading the small text. Marshall. His grin grew larger across his muzzle, flashing some of his perfect ivory teeth at me.
Happy to help.
Dorian. His tail flicked quickly behind him at my response.
I'll see you around, Dorian.
See you, Marshall. With that, he turned and walked into the distance. It was impossible for me to know at the time just how significant that moment was, the impact Marshall would have on my life. I hadn't even considered where our relationship would go from there. I'd just known one thing. For the first time in months, I'd felt that, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The clatter of something metallic resounded through the room, stirring me out of sleep. A sense of longing had grown in my chest at the memory I'd just dreamt. If only my problems were as simple as they were then. If only Marshall was still by my side, he'd know what to do. I sat up, stretching my back with a yawn. I wasn't sure how long I'd slept nor what time it was, but I was thankful for the peaceful rest. I remembered the noise then, drawing my gaze to the shutter at the front of the room. There was something on the floor near it. I grabbed the lantern from nearby, surprised that it had lasted the night, and walked over to find a small metal tray. Oh joy, room service. On it was a bowl filled with gruel and a small cup of water, some of which had spilled onto the tray. Guess this was what my breakfast would look like for the near future. I hauled the tray back over to my bed, staring at it intently. I had to weigh my options here, considering there was a significant chance this meal could be poisoned. Even if it was only slightly toxic, the consistency of meals dosed with it would wear me down faster in an attempt to break me. I'd heard horror stories on the news of prison guards who had done similar things, as well as seen it done in countless media as an attempt to break the hero down. Was it better to take the risk of eating it, or to let myself starve? My stomach growled, urging me toward the former option. If that was their plan, starting it today wouldn't make sense due to Wonderland. Alistair had ordered Xavier's finger treated yesterday, leading me to believe they wanted us in top shape for the event. Fuck it. I picked up the plastic cutlery and scooped a spoonful into my mouth. The texture wasn't all too far from oatmeal and tasted slightly sweet as well. There must have been an abundance of sugar if they'd bothered to waste it on prisoner food. Maybe there was a way I could make use of that info in the future. It wasn't as awful as I was expecting, but this was as a meal repeatedly would surely drive me mad. Due to the simplicity, it wasn't long before it was gone. My stomach felt full enough to hopefully provide me with enough energy for what was to come. I set the tray back by the door, leaving everything intact and placed neatly on it. Trying something off the bat was too expected of a move, and it would serve me better to be patient. With breakfast out of the way, I was left with nothing much else to do. I could work out, but I was worried doing so would hinder me during Wonderland. Instead, I picked up a newspaper to pass the time. I wish they'd left a pen or something with me. I had nothing to fill out the crosswords or other puzzles with. Switching between the newspapers, they were all at least 4 years old. Some even went back decades, covering world events and local stories I remembered hearing about growing up. A laugh escaped me at seeing an article talking about Y2K. People worried back then about a computer bug causing the apocalypse. In reality, it had all been a miscommunication error. If only they'd known what was actually to come. After finishing that paper, I moved to put it on the shelf with the others as I'd read. As I was bending down to pick up the next one, something at the base of the shelf caught my eye. I pushed it to the left, squatting to get a better view. There was a hole gouged into the metal there, barely big enough for 3 fingers to wiggle their way through. I brought the lantern down for a closer look, trying to make it out if there was anything inside. It was empty, but I saw the cavity curve downwards before going up towards the other side of the wall. As I leaned closer, I heard a faint sound coming from it. Of what, I wasn't sure yet. I brought my ear down to it, listening intently to discern what it was. It sounded like breathing. The breaths were gentle but shuddering, a slight wheezing to them. It almost sounded like they had an old man trapped on the other side. I knew the bandits could be cruel, but surely they wouldn't make an elderly man their prisoner. What use could he serve them? Bait? A loud smash echoed through my cell as someone banged on the metal door to the room, startling me to my feet. I stood there watching as a shutter slowly raised up from the floor. Light started to fill the chamber as 2 of my captors stood there, one holding a lantern while the other held a length of rope. I stared at them, unmoving, until one let out a sigh. "Come on, hands out for us. There's no need to make this difficult." I stepped forward, reluctantly raising my arms. I wanted to tell them to fuck off, to fight them and cause a scene, but knowing it would get me nowhere. I'd be complicit for now. My hands were bound in a similar fashion to the previous days, except with the comfort of them being in front of me this time. "All right, bud. Let's get your ass to Wonderland." The guard with the lantern closed the shutter behind us as we'd stepped out into the hall. I made a mental note for later that they'd kept me in Unit 229. The shutter next to me, Unit 228, was closed as well. With a large padlock through the handle, someone was definitely inside it. The halls we walked were all glaringly plain, rows upon rows of storage units that were indistinguishable in every way except for their numbers. Lining them were lanterns from the nails embedded in the concrete, making up the difference in light due to the lack of windows. We reached a staircase at the end of the hall and made our way down to the basement level. The place hadn't changed in style, yet just knowing it was underground made it feel creepier. I doubted this place had any sort of large underground space big enough to host whatever event was planned. It was just a storage facility after all. Upon opening the door, I was met with a long, narrow hallway. A guard waited on the other side and nodded as we passed. The other end of the tunnel was a distance away. Stopping at a turn to the right, we were in some kind of secret passage? If so, then where to? I could feel my mind starting to spin with questions again, starting to veer out of control. There was so much I didn't know that it was overwhelming. I took a deep breath then, exhaling all the anxieties and scattered thoughts. There had been a time and place for that, but it wasn't now. My priority for now was keeping myself alive and finding Xavier. Now wasn't the time to panic over things I couldn't change. Now was the time to focus on survival. After several minutes of silence, broken only by the soft padding of our feet on the concrete, we finally reached the end of the turning passage. There was a set of stairs leading up to another guard and a rusted metal door. I blinked my eyes at the light upon exiting. We looked to be in a shipping warehouse. Shipping crates covered the place, their brightened hues bringing a refreshing color palette to the bleak surroundings. Broken machinery scattered the floor, mixed in with other bits of debris. Light streamed through the holes in the ceiling. The owner of this building must have owned the storage unit as well. Why else would there be a tunnel directly connecting the two? Rather than going further in, we stuck along the wall and were brought to a small locker room. It was clear this was where the employees had once changed into their uniforms and stored their belongings while at work. Now it was full of bandits, guarding the edges and all possible exits. The rest of the people, who I assumed were other prisoners, mingled around the room, watching each other with cautious glances. A few had sheathed knives at their waists, making their role obvious, though for some, it was hard to tell if they might be a bandit or a prisoner. These were all just people after all, dirty, scarred, and broken by the events of the past. My escorts untied my hands, giving me a wave as they walked through the exit. "Have fun today, and make sure you put on a good show for us." He laughed to himself before he and his partner left the room, leaving me with nearly 24 other prisoners in a large room. Another person went out to follow them, but was stopped by one of the guards at the door.
"Excuse me, if I could just get through there." "No way, buddy. You got Wonderland to attend."
They flashed a smile, no hint of that earlier confidence shed.
"Exactly. I need to get good seats before they run out."
The bandit smiled back.
"All right, then. Show me your scar."
Their smile twitched.
"Excuse me?" "If you're truly an ignited, then Alistair would have left his mark on you to prove you belong here."
As a practice, he pulled his shirt just below his collarbone to reveal a small burn wound visible through his fur.
"Oh, hi,
Their face had whitened, that confidence now completely gone.
"That's what I thought."
The prisoner walked away, embarrassed and nervous. This confirmed my concerns from earlier, that they all wore the burn and that it was intentional. This was their mark, and the best way to identify them. After that exchange, I took the next moment to analyze everyone in the room. There were a few interesting parties milling about both sides, and I wondered if I could make any allies to help us escape. A familiar shape drew my attention. I finally locked eyes with Xavier, the bat looking disheveled and worn out from just the one night alone in his cell. His eyes lit up a bit as we made our way towards each other and threw ourselves into a tight hug. I hadn't even realized just how much I missed the kid until he was right there. I stroked his head fur with one hand, smoothing out as best I could. I felt some wet droplets hit the back of my neck. "You okay, Xavier?"
"I'm fine. I just need a moment."
He raised a hand to wipe his face before drawing himself back out of the hug. I noticed his finger had been wrapped with gauze and set. "How's the finger holding up?"
"It hurts to move it, but the nurse they have here was nice."
"Nice enough to be an ally?" He brought his hand to his chin as he considered the idea. Possibly. I wouldn't be willing to bet it all on one interaction, though. Well, we can put her in the maybe category then. You make it sound as though you'd already have the beginnings of a plan in place. Who's to say I don't? The fact that your bedhead seems to be about as tamed as mine. Hey, I'll have you know it's a stylistic choice. It makes me seem more approachable. Or like you're one of those people who has a shirt that says, "Don't talk to me until I've had my coffee." I put my hand to my chest in mock offense. I would never. I don't believe you. It's true. Then was it on a mug? I remained silent, causing him to smile. It was on a mug. There was no possible rebuttal I could make now, sighing in defeat. Point Xavier. He celebrated with a fist pump. Even though he'd won that exchange, I couldn't help but smile at getting to talk with the bat again. He was a good person to banter with to take your mind off things. Frankly, that was the one thing I'd wanted to do the most right now. Humor is my favorite coping mechanism with dealing with stress. So then, what is your big plan? I wish I had one, kid. There's just too many variables at the moment to sort it out properly. He nodded, thinking to himself. I take it you haven't learned anything about Wonderland, then? I shook my head. About as much as you have, I guess. Then maybe I could help. We turned in unison at the sudden voice, coming face to face with a spotted hyena I'd never seen before. The fur cascaded over their head like a mohawk, clearly combed thoroughly. Their eyes were a deep blue, brought out by the heavy bags that rested under them. Clearly they didn't get much sleep. A silver nose ring sat on the end of their muzzle, surprising me. I hadn't seen any of the other prisoners allowed anything like this. They wore a white tank top and dark maroon khakis, both in a surprisingly good condition. The hyena definitely took a lot of pride in their looks. That was, except for the dirty bandages they kept wrapped around their arms, it was a curious contrast to the cleanliness. Name's Shen. Always wonderful to meet two handsome men like yourselves. They'd extended both hands to us with a smirk, waiting expectantly for us to take them. The exchange was off-putting, their tone of voice low and tired, yet carrying an air of confidence and intrigue. They almost sounded unamused by the situation. I took the left one, resulting in a firm and lengthy handshake. Well now, don't be shy. I've yet to hear the lovely couple's names. I blinked. Couple? Are you not? I thought if two studs like you knew each other, there'd be no chance they'd be single and ready to mingle. There's only so much mingling you can do in an apocalypse, too. Don't let the opportunity pass you by. I was dumbfounded at the hyena, my mind drawing a blank at how I was supposed to respond. Instead, I focused on the first thing they'd said. You said you could help? They smirked. Ah, so you were listening. I thought I'd lost you for a moment there. Of course I can help, though it will come at a price. Of course it will. Hey now, I never said that I wasn't open to negotiations. That is, if you tell me your names. I rolled my eyes at them. I could already tell they were going to be a handful to deal with, but I needed information. I'm Dorian. He's Xavier. With a final shake, they let go of our hands. Took you long enough. Dorian and Xavier, huh? That really rolls off the tongue. And that's only my second favorite muscle to use. Shen winked before clapping their hands together. So, negotiation. How does $1 million sound? Again, I was speechless. They were definitely after something else, but the absurdity caught me off guard. I'm sorry, what? You're forgiven. There was a silence between all three of us before they spoke again. Too high?
Clearly. Besides, what use would you even have for money? Isn't it all worthless now?
An excellent point. God, why hadn't I thought of that? The sarcasm in their voice was so thick I could practically feel it in the air. What is it that you actually want, Shen? Your souls. All emotion and expression left them at that before the smile returned. Kidding. And you should have seen the look on your faces. Xavier and I exchanged a glance, both of us wearing an unamused expression. Shen sighed, giving up. The way they had acted seemed to be their true self, this display before being just that, a display. Their bodies seemed to sag a bit more with exhaustion, their posture relaxing as their voice carried an almost disinterested tone. Damn, tough crowd. Would it kill you both to lighten up a bit? Look, I won't ask for much. Just make a deal with me that if you both survive Wonderland, we can have a three-way. I waited for them to show it was a facade and laugh again, but it never came. They were serious. Count me out. I'm already in a committed relationship. I thought you said you two weren't dating. We're not. My boyfriend isn't here with us. They sighed. All right, lover boy's out then. How about you, Twink? Xavier didn't respond to them. I looked over, seeing him become flustered at the overall exchange. What are you acting so shy for? It's just sex. I doubt you're a virgin. No response from the bat. Wait, seriously? No fucking way! The smirk stretched across their face again, their interest reaching an all-time high. They slung an arm around his shoulder. I can give you the first time of your life, handsome. Don't worry. I can be gentle with nervous bottoms like you. It wouldn't be my first time. Reaching the limit of what he could take, Xavier flung his arms up, accidentally smacking Shen in the process. I'm not going to fuck you. Shen winced, rubbing the spot where they were hit. Okay, I get it. No need to violence right now. Save that for the arena. Finally, some kind of information. What do you mean? Realizing they weren't going to get in our pants and that the whole ordeal might have gone too far, they sighed. Fine. I'll tell you in exchange for a favor later. We glared at them, causing them to raise their hands innocently. And I promise it won't be for sex. Deal? I smiled, preferring this outcome to the previous offers. Deal. They rubbed the back of their neck, stretching and letting out a yawn. The brief exchange had already drained some of what little energy they had. Wonderland is essentially a survival of the fittest type event. Our safe-proclaimed saviors send us out into the arena. I pointed to the exit near the windows. And match us against Fated in a fight to the death. I felt the color draining from my face. They had captured Fated? But how? As soon as I asked myself, an answer popped into my head. The shipping containers. Bingo! They store them there until they have enough participants for the next event. They scoffed at their own words. Participants? As if we had a fucking choice. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how the hell we were going to get out of this one alive. There was no way they'd leave us unarmed for it. Otherwise, it would just get boring for them after a while. We had to stand a chance for them to even consider it entertainment. I was about to try and get more info out of them when a voice interjected itself. Shen! They sounded annoyed, our hyena ally clearly having pissed someone else off. Shit, quick, hide me. Don't let Treat find me. Who? Treat, it's his name. He doesn't like when you question it. They ducked behind us, using us as cover as an attempt to avoid the approaching person. Striding towards us was a slightly scruffy wolverine. It had surely been a while since they had a chance to trim his fur. His eyes were maroon color, a couple shades lighter than Shen's pants. He wore a varsity jacket over a gray shirt, showcasing his larger build and muscled arms. He clearly had been some kind of athlete, judging by his appearance. I wondered if he maybe had been a student at the university before everything had happened. He was shorter than the rest of us, around 5'9", but his voice was the deepest as he spoke.
I can see you crouched behind them, Shen.
No, you can't. As if reading each other's thoughts, Xavier and I stepped to the side and sank. Traitors! The stranger stepped forward, looking down at the hyena.
Come on, get up now.
They stood up, putting a fake whine in their voice and pouting like a child about to throw a tantrum. But, Dad, you said I could go play with the other kids. The Wolverines sighed, rubbing their forehead in annoyance.
Why do I still put up with you?
Because you have no other friends. Treat paused as if considering it.
You're right.
He brought his gaze to me, taking his attention off of Shen.
Nice to meet you. Interested in becoming my new friend?
I looked at Shen briefly before meeting Treat's eyes again.
Absolutely.
He smiled while the hyena stared in shock. You can't replace me that easily.
Watch me.
He turned to Xavier next, who was already smiling in anticipation.
You don't even have to ask. Would you look at that? 2 for the price of 1.
The three of us laughed while Shen grumbled unamused.
Come on, dude. You know I'm kidding around.
He brought an arm around their shoulder, shaking them a bit. This seemed to bring them back around to their energy from before.
Sorry about any trouble they might have caused. They're an asshole, but I promise they're a lovable kind.
Shen shrugged. When it suits me. I rolled my eyes. They were actually pretty helpful. Aside from trying to fuck us immediately. Without looking, Treat smacked Shen upside the head. How? What was that for?
Why do you always have to try and fuck people as soon as you meet them?
Another shrug. It's a force of habit. Don't slut shame me.
I'm not. I'm just you-shaming you.
So you admit it? Treat sighed, but Shen interrupted before they could speak again. My sluttiness worked on you, didn't it?
You forget. I've yet to fuck you.
Emphasis on yet. Shen winked, prompting an eye roll from the Wolverine.
Anyway, you said they were helpful for once.
Hey! We ignored them. They told us a bit about what Wonderland actually is. We really have to fight Fated.
Unfortunately so. It's a feat in and of itself they manage to capture any, but they somehow do.
If it was true, there really would be something impressive. And how do you know that? Shen smirked as if waiting for this moment. Because, Loverboy, you're looking at 2 of its survivors. Seriously?
Seriously. This'll be my 2nd event.
And my 3rd. I'm the reigning champion. The whole crowd loves me.
That's probably because you've slept with most of them.
That's called strategy, my dear friend. Judging by their interactions, there was no doubt the 2 knew each other. It would make sense if they bonded over the trauma of being captured by the bandits. They were close, and for whatever reason, they deemed us trustworthy enough to be allies. I had already had enough regret with how I treated Xavier, so maybe I could make up for that here. I could trust the duo. Right? Before I could ask more, I was once again interrupted by the sound of a loud voice.
All right, everyone. Cut the chit-chat and pay attention. The show is about to begin.
The room quieted, and Treat leaned in, whispering to us.
Good luck, you two. I hope to see you both at the end of the day.
Shen turned to look at Xavier. I call dibs on that crop top if you do die. This earned another smack from the Wolverine as the two walked away. They are certainly interesting.
You can say that again.
I opened my mouth, but was met with a glare from the bat until I shut it again.
Do you really think we can trust them?
I don't know, but they put some in us. We should at least try. Xavier nodded, and the two of us walked closer to the windows to get a better view of our arena. I shielded my eyes from the bright morning light as we peered out, taking what would soon be the place where we fought for our lives. The shipping containers had been arranged in a square against the warehouse, massive inside and stacked 2 or 3 high. The flooring was covered in sand, likely used to absorb any blood split in the heat of battle. Atop the adjacent walls sat the bandits, my eyes widening at the sheer number of them. There had to be a few hundred here, a number much larger than where I was greeted. Where had they been keeping them all? Thinking about it, I wasn't sure that the number of people could fit in the storage facility we were being held in. Was there a secondary base? Or were some of these people guests? Either the amount who showed up was intentional, or someone had broken the first 2 rules of this club. I shivered at the thought of some of these people went out of their way to watch their fellow people fight to the death. I was starting to feel like a gladiator, just without the glory. Or adequate weapons. I could only see so much from where we were, but I heard more. The chatter of the masses in the stand, the nervous murmurs from the other prisoners, and the loud bangs from a view of the shipping containers. The fact that this was outside and this loud was an incredible risk. Who knows how many fated could be alerted by this show? Having this many fated in a small place was dangerous enough, but if they attracted more, it'd be a bloodbath. The longer I'd stood watching this scene, the more unsettled I felt. I was unwillingly dragged into this shit show, and now I was meant to serve them as entertainment. The noise began to die down suddenly, drawing my attention away from my thoughts to see what had caused this. Oh, for fuck's sakes, Alistair. Standing atop the opposite wall, Cal positioned off to the side, was my ex. While he'd shown some of his stage personas to us yesterday, this felt over the top. Now, to accentuate his role as the greatest showman alive, he donned a top hat and cane. It felt completely over the top, but the worst part was that he looked good with them. The crowd had fallen silent entirely as he stood there, smugly looking out over his sycophants. He was reveling in the attention. Once he decided he'd had enough, he spread his arms wide and spoke. His voice boomed across the arena, echoing back across the space like speakers had been set up.
Welcome, everyone, to the show!
With those words alone, violent cheering erupted from the crowd, drowning out the banging from inside the storage containers. The people were excited and eagerly awaiting this moment.
We here at the Ignited are happy to be able to bring you all another round of our glorious Wonderland. We have spent the past few months gathering both contestants and fated in order to provide you all with the best experience possible. Today will be our biggest show yet, so let's give everyone who helped make this possible a hand.
The sound of their collective claps echoed across the space, deafeningly loud. He was almost like a salesman at that moment, trying to push a product on a bunch of naive customers. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Shen clapping along before Treat flicked the back of their head. This prompted a confused stance from the hyena, making the Wolverine roll his eyes and accidentally making eye contact with me. I smiled and shook my head before facing the arena once more as the applause died down. That yin really was something. I couldn't get a read on them, and that concerned me, but at least Treat seemed to be able to keep them in line mostly. Well, beggars can't be choosers. They were our best choice of allies at this moment, so I might as well trust them.
Those of you who have attended our event before know the drill, but I see a number of fresh faces among the crowd. Allow me to explain. Just down there, sequestered to that warehouse, await our lovely contestants. 21 individuals in the prime of their life, ready to face down a variety of horrors. One by one, we will select a contestant to enter our lovely arena and face off against a randomly selected fated. However, it would be horribly cruel to leave them unarmed. The Ignited aren't monsters after all.
Never had I wanted to smack the smirk off someone's face harder than I did now. The more I listened to him, the more the rage built up in me. Use it, Dorian. You can't get to him yet, but you can keep yourself and Xavier alive.
Instead, we were lucky enough to have been blessed with a collection of antique weapons that have been preserved in premium condition. Gentlemen, if you'll kindly bring out the rack.
He waved his hand towards the side of the arena. There was a clatter of metal as the door to the arena opened and a large rectangular mass was slid out from under the sheet. Once in view of everyone, the two guards handling it whipped it off to reveal dozens of weapons beneath. Swords, knives, axes, hammers, maces, all sorts of medieval weaponry. My best guess was they'd found it in one of the storage units here, like belonging to a collector of the sort.
Our contestants will receive their weapon of choice, and that is where the fun really begins. The fate is unleashed, and one-on-one they battle until one remains standing. Now you might be thinking, what happens if the Fated wins? Worry not, my friends. The answer is quite simple. Our next contestant will be sent out to valiantly continue the fight their fallen ally had started, until either our participants succeed, or it gets too boring to see it win and we intervene. However, should they manage to kill all our Fated before the end, a special prize will await them all. Does everyone understand?
Cheers sounded as the impatient crowd yearned for their entertainment. Their energetic fervor was almost intoxicating.
Excellent! Then without further ado...
Tension rose in the air as the attention was drawn to Alistair, his charisma put into overdrive and becoming almost magnetic.
Friends and families of all species, from all manner of homes and places, for those inside and outside, in the gender binary, on and off the queer spectrum. Today we provide to you the show of a lifetime. Man against monster, predator versus prey. Who shall prevail before the light draws to a close? I am your lovely host, Alice, and I welcome you all to my Wonderland.
Upon finishing the sentence, flames appeared to shoot out of his hands, drawing the loudest roar yet from the surrounding crowd. I'd always known he had a flair for the dramatic, but to use it to this degree felt like insanity, going so far as to create his own stage effects. As much as I hated this, what I hated more was the part of me that was impressed. To put this much effort into any kind of production was a difficult feat, especially in such a short time frame in our current world. Yet I still had absolutely no clue as to his motivations. Was it desire for power? Attention? It could have been something else entirely, deeper than I knew. The idea alone scared me. That manic look in his eyes from yesterday still haunted me. There was something wrong with Alistair. and I feared it would burn us all up before we managed to break free from his pressing ignited. I was hoping to take a moment further to dwell on the situation when Alistair's voice rang out once more.
To start off today's events, we have a very special contestant in our midst today. Someone I knew so long ago. Someone who he believes he's all that.
He spit the words out with a venom, his eyes searching the crowd of prisoners gathered in the windows for me.
I was lucky to have stumbled upon him when I did, having only shown his face here yesterday, but when I looked into those fierce eyes of his, I saw the spirit of a fighter. He's become a changed man since I knew him, it seems, yet I still have my own doubts. Instead, we will give him a chance to prove himself today. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to my soon-to-be dearly departed former love, Dorian!
I could feel the corner of my eye twitching, my anger beginning to bubble once more. This fucker had the audacity to make me go first! I narrowed my eyes at the lion through the windows as he waited for me to exit. He wanted to play with fire so badly, huh? As I turned towards the door, I made eye contact with Xavier. The same scared look that had passed last night was plastered on his furry face, though to a somewhat softer degree. I gave him as large a smile as I could muster to comfort him, patting him on the shoulder as I passed. Don't worry, Xavier. I got this. I thought I'd heard him say something in response, but it was swallowed by the murmurs of the crowd as the guards grabbed me and forced me to move faster. They pushed me out the door, causing me to stumble in the sand. I quickly caught my footing and made my way toward the board.
Quiet now, everyone. It's time to see which weapon our intrepid hero will choose.
Ignoring the lion, I scanned the rack for any spears and drew up short. The weapons were all short to medium range, allowing the user little distance between them and the enemy. Rounding to the other side, I saw my best option. Carefully, I withdrew the rapier from its place and tested its balance in my hand. It was much finer than the fencing foils I'd used in my youth, the grip comfortable on my palm and finely balanced. There was a slight swish as I slashed it through the air.
Our contestant has chosen the rapier. Everyone give him a round of applause for his sportsmanship.
The rack was guided back into the start room, ready in case someone else had to take a turn at what I would face out here. I ignored the jeers and shouts of the crowd and instead stared straight at Alistair, his eyes boring into mine. He was enjoying this even more than yesterday.
Before we draw your fate, is there anything you would like to say to the crowd? They might just well be your final words.
I thought for a moment, trying to decide what to say. He was right, and that this could be my end, but I was too stubborn to give him the satisfaction. Deciding to opt out of the words, I instead raised my sword towards Alistair, and I pointed it straight at him, as if calling his bluff. The message was clear. He didn't break me before, and he wouldn't break me this time.
Cocky! Better hope you can live up to that attitude.
Cal stepped forward then, holding a bowl out to Alistair filled with several paper slips.
Without further ado, let's pick your opponent.
Alistair stuck his hand in, circling the papers before drawing out a single piece and unfolding it.
Your future lies behind.
The lion paused for dramatic effect, the crowd holding their breath as they waited for the results. My own heart pounded in my chest. Despite my bold response to Alistair, I was terrified. The fated weren't something one messed around with, and despite me trying to keep a calm facade, there was a serious chance I was about to die.
Door number 3.
A large metal grinding sounded in the space, the doors to one of the shipping crates opening. I hadn't noticed it before, but the one atop it was ajar with ropes coming out of it. The The people inside were pulling them, unlocking the door and forcing it open just enough for light to peek into the space. The noise of the arena had ground to a halt at that, my breathing the only thing stopping my anxiety from completely taking over. Any second now. The bang of the doors slamming open drew startled cries from the crowd as, at long last, my opponent slowly emerged. The Fated was huge, roughly the size of the vampire I'd once encountered a mere week ago. However, this one carried a lot more flesh on it. It was an amalgamation of parts fused together to make what stood before me. Facing me was its first skull, sockets hollow with an eye loosely hanging from one. Fur trailed down its neck, leading to the bulging body. Its skin was smooth but lumpy, looked as if it were malleable to the touch. It had those same gray tones of that of clay as well. Another skull carrying antlers emerged from its back, as if the body had absorbed whoever it had once belonged to. Though it only had one arm, the two additional appendages that stuck out like that of an insect made up for it. As it ambled out into the arena slowly at first, it began to dash towards me, ready to catch its first prey in who knows how long. The creature wasn't too fast, not like the others I encountered. Likely due to its mass, I was able to easily dodge out of the way of its first swing. The Fated's arm smashed into the sand, throwing up a spray of dust. It spun with me, tracking my movement with its eyes. It slammed its paw down, and I jumped at the last moment. I swung my sword at the limb and sliced clean through it. The sensation caught me off guard, confusing me for a moment. A rapier was a heavy weapon, yes, but it was still thin and flexible, a tool meant for piercing and slashing, without the girth and momentum to sever bone. Upon looking at my rapier, there was a lack of a distinct black blood that most Fated carried. There was a shine of some kind of fluid, though what kind I had no clue. A growl from the Fated drew my attention back to it, showing the arm still attached. It didn't make sense. I knew I cut it. Then from beneath it, I saw the severed arm, only it wasn't lying motionless on the ground. It was scurrying towards me, claws scratching at the sand in a desperate attempt to gain traction. I backed up, trying to give myself some time to think. The Fated seemed to know what I wanted, though. It closed in on me. It moved with more vigor than before, likely enraged at me literally slicing its arm off. Precisely, I sliced again, cutting off more from its body as I circled around it. Sure enough, the fallen pieces brought themselves to life and hurried after me. The lumps rolled, crawled, and threw themselves across the ground, trying to get to me. I watched the main body carefully as it regenerated, desperately searching for any discernible weakness. The closest I could get was that it took from its existing mass to build the missing portion, the Fated growing smaller over time. In return, the smaller size made it more agile. It didn't toss clouds of sand up as it moved anymore, but it was getting harder to dodge its attacks. I didn't want to slice any more of it off, but I didn't have much choice. Its flesh was so soft and the rapier was in incredible condition. A sharp pain on my lower thigh, a blob had caught up to me without me noticing, and had flung itself out my leg, latching onto the flesh through my pants. I batted it away with my blade, piercing through it as it fell to the ground. The sheer amount of blobs chasing after me was getting harder and harder to keep track of. I was struggling to avoid them all, not to mention the main body lunging after me. Two blobs slammed into me from different angles, one against my back and one on my non-dominant hand. They bit into my flesh as I spun to remove them, my panic rising. There was a way to defeat this, but how? I stared at the main body, smaller and more agile now. There had to be a hint of how to kill this thing from its origin. I kept its distance from me now, allowing the scattered bottom parts to have their way with me instead. If I reduced its size further, I might have a shot. It was incredibly risky, but I had no other ideas and I was growing desperate. Carefully weaving my way around the pieces, I went for it all with all I had. I swung my rapier as I spun to the side, shrugging off most of my blow. I barely managed to make contact, its agility letting it keep far away from me. I jumped back as it took a swipe at me, its claws slashing across my forehead. Blood began to trickle into my right eye and forced it shut. I panted, desperate to find a way to win. My eyes scanned the field and I finally saw it. Past all the parts that surrounded me and its body, hidden all the way in the back of the shadows of the storage container it would have been housed in, was another lump of flesh. This one darker than the others and nearly indistinguishable from the rest aside from one key detail. It was the only one pulsating, an iridescent sheen like the fluid that spewed from the noxic veins covering the surface. This was my last chance, my final gambit at surviving this fight to the death. I stared at the faded, circling the field of flesh till I had separated it from its origin. I lunged forward towards it, then feinted and spun in the other direction. Sand sprayed everywhere as I pushed towards the container. It was harder in the sand of the arena, but I was making good progress. A roar of fury sounded from behind me. The container shook as it caught on, racing to reach me before I closed in on its core. It was a race to the finish, and I only had a few seconds head start. I could hear the footsteps gaming on me as we drew close to our mutual goal, trying to beat the other to the dark enclosure. The faded was practically breathing down my neck as I reached the structure. With one final push, I flung myself forward, rapier extended like a radiant beam of light. A wet squelch marked the sound of my hit. I watched as black blood burbled out of the hole I made, seconds before the mass of the body behind me collided with my own and sent me sprawling. There was a dull thud of flesh against metal as I hit the wall of the container, blinding pain shooting through my back as I gasped. Stars danced in my vision as I looked from my place on the ground towards the entrance. The pulsating lump of flesh was now deflated and unmoving. The main body and other bits were as well. I pulled myself to my feet, using the wall for support. My body ached as I made my way to the center of the arena. I was lucky I hadn't been hit anywhere vital, but I'd need some recovery time. I turned towards the stand, staring back at Alistair and pointing my rapier towards him once more. It was hard to tell from this distance, but rather than the shock I'd been hoping for, I was met with one of smug certainty, like he'd expected this outcome.
It seems we have our first winner of the day.
The crowd had begun cheering during the fight. I had been too focused to tell, but I could hear nothing but their praise now. I played Alistair's little game and fallen right into his hands, serving as a circus rig for the world to see. A group of bandits emerged from the door and began picking up the pieces of the scattered, throwing them into the door it had originally emerged from. I could only stand and wait for Alistair to speak next. The door back to the waiting room sealed once more.
Quite a first performance, if I do say so myself. I can tell Dorian has quickly become a candidate for the favorite of today's event.
I glared up at him.
Even now, he still shows that fighting spirit. I'd say to give this man a hand, but he's already cut off enough for the day.
Somehow, the laughter from the audience was even worse than their cheers. Instead of facing my captors, I strode back to the door I'd come from as they brought the weapon rack back out.
It's going to be tough for the next candidate to beat that show, but he can certainly try. This contender joined our previous one on their journey here. A duo of two friends, who might just be more than they say they are.
I continued forward, ignoring the obvious jab.
He's tall, lean, and ready to leave our arena with a red sheen. Up next we have Xavier.
I felt my blood begin to boil at his words, wishing I could knock some sense into him. I hated that Xavier would have to go next, but I was in no condition to volunteer for his place. As I passed the rack, I placed my rapier on it while looking it over again. The mental imagery of Xavier's face when I left pressing itself to the forefront of my mind. It clicked then, why he had worn that fearful look as he emerged from the room. That look was still present on his face. we've been giving our choice of weapons from this rack, something to help us in close combat during our fights. In other words, there were no bows. Xavier was weaponless. To be continued. I love that byplay. Oh man, just talking to Alistair as the main character is so much fun. Even though he doesn't say anything, the internal dialogue is so much fun. Oh man, 2 new characters, Treat and Shen. Oh man. Cast is working up to be fun, and we got Troublemaker with Shen. Ooh, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of art of him, especially from Tori. Well, I'm ready for the next build. Oh man, this is going to be wild. I hope Xavier can handle it. I mean, we did do a bit of training with him with the rapier. I wonder if he's going to grab that and just play along a bit. So I think he'll be okay. If they kill off Xavier, I'm gonna be really sad. But oh no. Xavier will be fine. So yeah, this has been Fritz-Ay Says, and everyone have a nice day. Ciao.